and welcome to the Lifting the Iceberg podcast. My name is Tyler James Berger, and on this episode, I sit down with Genevieve Wood. Genevieve is a visionary multimedia artist based out of the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors in the Hudson Valley. Today, we talk about her latest painting and her message behind it. It was so fun to have this conversation with Genevieve. She is such a talented artist and so eloquent in her ability to speak her truth. And I really look at her as one of the biggest sleeping giants in the visionary art world. So without any further ado, please welcome Genevieve Wood. So, Genevieve, let's get right into it. What is the name of this piece and what inspired it?
I don't know that I have a name for this piece yet, but it is a piece about ancestry, and it is a prayer for the healing of our lineage. I've been really fascinated by the study of epigenetics and how gene expression is passed down through generations, to the point where you can have sometimes even emotional characteristics based on previous experiences and choices of the people who came before you. And that crossed with the study of how behavioral patterns are passed down through generations. You know, when you grow into the world, your family pod is the first set of humans that imprints upon you. And they're imprinted upon by their family and so on and so forth, and then also on societal levels. So we, in some ways, our soul is filtered through the lens of both our genetic ancestry and also our behavioral inheritance. And there's just, you know, the world, I think, is in a really interesting state because of a lot of there's a lack of tools in how to relate with each other. And that lack of tools can lead to a lot of like trauma building up upon trauma. And we're coming to, I think, a really beautiful state in the world right now where we're coming maybe closer to equilibrium than we've been in a long time, because I think partially because of technology, because we have the ability to speak up and also find demographics that also resonate with the same issues that we're going through or things that we're thinking about. And you see these larger movements of women coming together and the LGBTQ movement coming together and really just people starting to speak up and say what is right. And so what I think about a lot is that we're carrying within us things that aren't always ours, you know, and that process of self-inquiry that we can go through of thinking about, am I the way that I am because that's truly who I am, and what part of that is my lineage inheritance, you know, and in looking into that, like, what can we really stand strong in and be so proud to come from the people that we come from. And what parts of those are maybe some coping mechanisms developed as a response to trauma that don't have the healthiest outcome, and like which of those can we set down. So that's kind of like this process that I've been mulling over in my own soul and observing in society. And I made this piece kind of as a prayer for that, and the thought that if I could make this prayer of every person that we've ever come from coming together in peace, you know, and the smoke rings of the genetic lineage that are in the piece is like every person that ever came together to make you. And if we could have this prayer for them to bow their heads and hold hands together in peace and in love and in this acknowledgement, and if we could pray for that level of healing, then we would be able to live as this current generation, emerging as this brilliant, glorious, majestic hawk that's so present. And I chose the hawk specifically because I like the idea of whenever you are cleansing something with healing smoke, I think that the specific feathers that you're using to move that air and carry that medicine, it carries the medicine of that specific animal. So to have this like smoke cleansing our lineage filtered through the medicine of the hawk, which to me very much represents clear sightedness. They don't bullshit, so they can see very far, and they see through lies. They see things so clearly. And so to be able to see both the power of our lineage and the beautiful things we come from, but also to see it for what it is, of the unhealthy behavioral patterns that we've picked up, or things that are maybe traumas or phobias or fears that are stored in our lineage. And it's so cool that we're starting to see from a scientific perspective that is a real thing, that traumas that our great grandparents experienced could affect our behaviors and also our inclinations towards different illnesses and things like that. So if we can filter the medicine of our ancestors through this clear-sightedness of the hawk, then it would perhaps allow us to emerge as the current generation to live as fully as we can.
Wow. So this is, you're speaking to multi-generational trauma, from blood ancestors, but I know that you have some experience with past life regression and experiencing past lives, and it seems to me that there are ancestors of the blood that you're connected through by your genetic lineage, but then could there also be ancestors of spirit? And what are the differences in the ways that you can carry karmic baggage from past lives in contrast to carrying baggage in your genetics?
That is a fascinating question. I think that's a really great question. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. And I've been a textile artist for a long time, and I really feel like I was drawn to work with textiles in this life because it's been such an incredible metaphor for quantum physics and spirituality and existence for me. So I see a lot of things in terms of fabric. And when I think about how do we become the beings that we are today when we're both the, culmination of every person that has ever come before us in our genetic lineage, but we are also the culmination of every life that we've ever lived as a soul. And so I see those as this kind of cross weave, two sides to the weaving of a fabric. Yeah. And in one side of the weave, there's your entire lineage, from you to your mother and grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great, going all the way back. And then on the other side of the cross weave is every life that you've ever lived. And those interwoven together does create every soul that is feeling existence or has felt existence, and that kind of creates that tapestry of life. And my thoughts on it, and I think, I've been very inspired by Buddhism and the concept that the space that you are resonating in when you die is perhaps the same resonance that your soul is attracted into when you are born again. And I was told by incredible Buddhist monk that she said, we meditate for death. She was like, it sounds kind of dark, but the whole reason that we meditate is because the space that you're in when you die is like your mind is like a feather, and once you die, your soul will float from the same place you were in when you died to a resonant life situation, and that you'll be attracted to somewhere similar. And so we meditate so that when we do die, that our soul can be in a light space that will be attracted to a continuing lifetime of evolution.
Now, how has all of your revelations about the responsibilities of your ancestors and the way in which the choices that they made have affected you today, how has that changed the way in which you're living life and preparing for your death, knowing that the choices you make and how you live your life and how you die will have profound influences on the people who come after you or the next incarnation of your spirit?
That's a really also great question. And I think that in starting to expand my perspective to look back further into the concept of lives that I may have lived before, and also looking back on the history of the lives of the people who came before me, it gives me a great sense of reverence for this opportunity to be alive. And in seeing how short this sacred opportunity that we have to breathe air, coupled with it's kind of like a recap. When you go back in history, you're looking at, well, what have we learned here? You know, because we live in the present moment, and the reason we have the capacity for memory is not so that we can exist there, but so that we can learn from it and bring that into the present as to how do we live more fully now. And in that recap, what I've seen is in some ways just a piling up of trauma, really. And I have so much compassion for it, you know, through my own family lineage and perhaps my soul journey through lifetimes, but also through humanity. Like when people don't have tools to deal with an experience that occurs, some part of our subconscious, which is always looking out for us, will respond in the best way that it can, but it doesn't always know, and it can create some like really sticky situations.
Yeah, it's almost like you don't want to blame your ancestors for the trauma that they've ended up shaking onto you, because they were doing their best. You know, it's not every time you experience trauma, it's not necessarily your fault. It's not the result of the choices you've made, or anything that can be boiled down to your individual responsibility. Sometimes shit just happens, and you experience these deep traumas that stay with you and can perhaps continue past into your children and your grandchildren. And it's important to look back on the ancestors without too much blame, because they could have been going through some shit.
Very much so. And to just look at things with like that lens of compassion is so important. And so to answer your question, what it really makes me want to do is to identify where within myself am I proliferating patterns of pain that are not mine. And also, you know, within that genetic lineage. And I think that as a soul, we are magnetically drawn to a genetic lineage that is a resonant match for our soul. And so your behavior and your choices as a soul and the experiences of you've gone through are like, you're like, whoop, let's go down to that family. You know, like that is a resonant match and is just the perfect combination of blessings and lessons that are pertinent to my soul's journey. So it really, what I've been doing in response to this, like kind of like delving into this lineage work and this past life work is with all of my might and every genuine moment that I can give it, trying to let go of the patterns, at least identify to start with, the patterns that are not serving, and do what I can to be one tiny drop in the ocean that is at least moving in the momentum and the direction of wellness, you know, without even, I think it would almost be egotistical to be like, oh, I can just fix everything, you know, and I can just stop all of this. But if I can change the trajectory and instead of being like a blind cog in this machine that will run itself, you know, as long as we'll be carriers for those vibrations. So, and thinking about, you know, if I were to ever have children, that I would hope that I could do as much of this work as possible so that I give them a lighter load to carry down. And that both in dealing with my own trauma, but also in the ways that I treat people, so that I'm both healing whatever is within me to the best of my abilities, but also crafting a way of being that causes the least amount of trauma to others, and as far as just looking into the future.
Now, something that I see in your painting is we have this DNA strand with a couple in each bulb, so to speak, that represents each ancestral couple. And I noticed that at the top, the one with, you know, most prominently in the foreground that's pretty much a perfect circle. And now I don't see anything above that, which makes me think, you know, we may have past lives and past life regression, but do people ever have like future life regression?
I think so.
Yeah.
You know, I had
so like what is above that circle, I guess is what I'm asking. Like, so here we have the couple at the top, which represents like the modern couple, the ones that are alive today,
right, the current generation,
dealing with the ancestors and rather bringing the ancestors through into the current moment. But there's a blank space above that, which leads me to believe that what you're saying with this piece is that we're marching into a blind future. But do you think that the future, in a way, has already happened?
Well, I think there's, within that idea of like there are infinite timelines and infinite possibilities, and the one that we're drawing into being with this moment is based on our choices, So it's like every quantum possibility already exists, but we call a version of that into this present dimension and this reality through each choice that we make. And so I think in a lot of ways there are infinite futures, and we're stepping into any one or a combination of those infinite futures through our choices in this moment. And I've always really seen time as a spherical thing rather than linear or even radial. I see it as very spherical. So you can view each moment from many perspectives. And I actually had an experience like that walking down the street at I think 7:30 in the morning on my way to the corner store, and was having an incredible conversation with a friend of mine. And all of a sudden I stopped and I was having deja vu, and it was spherical deja vu. I was experiencing this moment from every possible angle, from the future looking back, from the past looking forward, and from sideways and all around. And I was incredibly sober and just had to stop and be like, whoa, dude, I'm having a moment right now. So I think that, you can tap into lives that you may live in the future, and you can tap into ones that you have had in the past. And I think our brains don't quite have the capacity to understand, and time within itself is a construct for those with limited minds, so that we can categorize existence
and deal with it better.
Assimilate it in a relatively organized fashion.
Wow. Well, I mean, the phenomenon of having a premonition is a very real thing. A lot of people have experienced the future in some small aspect and before it happened, and then lived through the thing that they experienced in the premonition. Like, I've had dreams before where I remember one time I had a dream of like carrying this little baby fox and keeping it safe from this predator that was trying to catch it, some kind of bird that was flying overhead. And then I woke up and I went to school. I went to my college campus to go to the computer lab, and I pulled up my computer and I pulled up Facebook, and the first video that came up when I pulled it up was one of those cute little viral videos of baby foxes, and the baby fox on the video was the exact one from my dreams. Like, I was watching the video and remembering what I had just dreamed the night before, and I think there's some relation between that dream and then that image coming into my life later in the day. Like, I think that's the closest thing I've ever had to a premonition. My dream kind of called the future. It's a crazy phenomenon.
Yeah, that really is. And even thinking about, the idea of collective consciousness. And if, we get into the idea of that concept within quantum physics where a wave becomes a particle upon recognition, so that whatever's going on, we've been able to observe that particles behave differently when they are being observed. And so that right there says that we have some effect on the physical world around us. And then you have, say, studies like the 100th monkey effect, where they were observing these monkeys on these separate islands, and then a few of the monkeys on one island figured out how to use this tool to help break into these, I think they were maybe clamshells for food. And then it caught on like wildfire.
Yeah.
So we are all affecting each other through collective consciousness, and you can kind of almost maybe grab onto a bandwidth both of the consciousness of the people around you, but also a possible future. So that seems like almost a meld of both of those to bring that in.
Yeah, the 100th monkey thing, I've heard that too. From what I read, it was they were giving these monkeys sweet potatoes, but they wouldn't eat the sweet potatoes if there was too much dirt on the outside, but they didn't know that they could wash them off. So a monkey learned from watching a human participant show the monkey how to wash off the sweet potato. Then that monkey learned, and then that monkey was able to teach the other monkey how to wash these sweet potatoes so you can eat them. And then there was like a tipping point where a certain amount of monkeys learned how to wash the sweet potatoes, then it just like
all
snapped.
the
They all
islands.
did.
Yeah. Even separated by the sea where they have no physical contact with each other.
And another thing that I think is interesting is the invention of the bow and arrow, where that was invented in Europe and North America independently. So you get the same invention coming out of completely the same creative output coming out completely independently into like two separate places. And there could be some kind of link that transcends space-time, that connects all beings and through multiple generations and all that.
I definitely, I think that too. And it's interesting kind of like bringing it back to the generational things, and really with time, I had this like really maybe crazy thought, but it was just this concept came to me of just in thinking about forgiveness, because I think when you're working with Lineage, forgiveness work is like one of the really powerful things that comes up, and it is such an incredible technology. And just the idea that the vibration of, it's just, try the idea on for size and, let it roll around in your mouth for a second. The idea that the vibration of forgiveness has the ability to transcend time and space and can travel back through time to affect your ancestors. Yeah. And because I was thinking about like when we're forgiving, the vibration
of forgiveness
has the ability to travel back through time. Because what I was thinking about was, and I was like, I saw this image of like, if you ever played with like two cans and a string when you're a kid, and you'd stand on opposite sides of the house and like try to hear each other, like old telephone stuff, it's like the vibration physically carries, and that somehow vibration can go back through time in a way that other things can't. So it breaks through that barrier that we see as linear time, and that when you forgive someone, you don't actually forgive them now. That forgiveness travels back to them in that time they were in and sets them free. And so when we forgive ourselves, we're not actually forgiving ourselves in this moment. We are going back to the space and time where we were in that moment, and where whatever occurred like had us freeze up, and we forgive that version of ourselves.
And that's how you truly liberate your present self.
And you liberate your present self, because the reason your present self is not liberated is because you've been dragging a tiny piece of the past. And back to the concept of like the fabric of space-time and relating to textiles. It's like, imagine wearing clothing and traveling through an area with many brambles, and all the brambles are trauma. And as you travel, like the brambles will catch on your clothing. And the farther that you go, you're just like ripping this long piece of cloth through, and it creates this big like rip in the fabric of space-time, and almost like a slingshot or something, it gains momentum. And that's why our baggage gets heavier the longer that we go, because it's got more physical resistance, because that belongs in the past where it happened, but we carry it with us forward. And so just that idea that you can kind of like travel through space and time and bend time in that way by doing that forgiveness work. Because when you heal the patterns within you that were carried down to you by your ancestors, the lesson has been set free. And then everyone who ever was a carrier of that lesson is also set free. And I think that our ancestors do breathe. They breathe and they rest easier, in their slumber, when we can finally learn the things that they suffered for and struggled so hard to carry to us. Because instead of a burden, it's a sacred lesson.
And I'm seeing now, I love your use of smoke to portray the ancestors, because smoke is lighter than air. It has no baggage. It's a way of remembering your ancestors and integrating your ancestors without necessarily carrying any of their unintended weight.
Absolutely. And
now,
go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to ask you about the color scheme of the painting.
The color scheme was just one of those happy accidents. I didn't exactly know where I was going with this piece, but I just started smushing some color around.
A lot of brown and more like a yellowish light, illuminated light brown at the top.
Yeah, we've got some quinacridone violet in the bottom here. It's such a good word. It's like a raspberry and wine had a love child.
Yeah.
And I think that it feels like very like primal to me, almost like these colors of survival and physicality, of that kind of like raspberry red into kind of like a terracotta red into more of like an ochre yellow. But I think they were much more intuitive. You know, I wasn't thinking too hard about the colors, which is good. Sometimes I think it's possible, especially for me to overthink what I'm doing with art, but it kind of just came out this way. And I started this piece actually in a workshop with Autumn Sky Morrison, and I'm so grateful. Like, she was an incredible teacher and just really helped us with just the right amount of encouragement, and also hands off, like, you got this and this is your vision. And she was able in this very like Zen Taoist way to help us emerge at our visions without us even realizing that she did anything, while she's weaving like insane magic the whole time.
So when someone looks at this piece, what do you hope they take away from it?
I think off the top, there's an emotion of emerging victorious that I hope is communicated from it. Even just the kind of ethereal nature of the smoke in the background of the painting versus the very physical spread wings and majestic stance of the hawk as it comes forward is an easy takeaway. And for myself, like, a lot of my art is very much about the vibration that I'm putting into it. And maybe it's a longer route to communication, but I'm not always so concerned with all of that being obvious to the viewer. You know, I think that the world is held together by intent. And so the intent and the medicine that I put into these pieces when I pray with like every brushstroke and every intention that I put into it is what's coming through. And I almost like that they're subtle and not always quite obvious. But I very much made this as a prayer, not just for my specific lineage, but for the lineage of humanity and for all of us to have this. Imagine what kind of society we would live in if every person that we have all ever come from peacefully related with each other. What kind of humans could we be, and what kind of life could we experience? And so this piece is very much a prayer for that. And I at least like to think that somewhere on a molecular subconscious level, that this is the medicine and the vibration that this will bring to people with its presence, even if they don't necessarily know that backstory that went into it.
Wow. Genevieve, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks so much for asking about it and for the conversation. I really appreciate it.
How do people find you?
My Instagram is Delphi Whispers, and I'm also on Facebook, Genevieve Wood.
Cool.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks again for listening to the Lifting the Iceberg podcast. Please be sure to check out Genevieve Wood on social media to see her other art and all of her other creations. Thank you to Alexa Spaddy for designing the graphics for this podcast. You can find her at Alexa Spaddy on Instagram and at Alexa Spaddy Art on Facebook. Thank you to Kerusu for the soundtrack Stay With Me. You can find out more about Kerusu on Facebook and Spotify.